Before I introduce our speaker this evening, I want to say just a word about his topic, which is this building. The first time I walked into Fuller Lodge was just about 10 years ago for a Historical Society lecture, and this room absolutely took my breath away. Now I get to come into it every day as part of my job, but the awe has never diminished. It is truly a special place, a great piece of architecture that is steeped in world-changing history, and we should never forget that. As a community, we should always do what we can to protect this building and preserve it. Well, my love affair with Fuller Lodge actually led to my meeting Craig Martin. We served together on the Fuller Lodge Historic Districts Advisory Board when we were both stay-at-home parents working as freelance writers. He started to write a book on the buildings of Bath Row, but got hired by the county, which really cut into his writing time. I told him I could help him out with the book, and then I was hired by the Historical Society, which really cut into my writing time. But after about 4 years, we finally eked out enough time to finish Of Logs and Stone, which is Craig's latest book. Working with Craig was a pleasure. As anyone who knows Craig, and that's just about everybody in town knows, he's very easygoing and a lot of fun to be around. Craig was born and raised in the suburbs of Philadelphia, but fell in love with the mountains of New Mexico at age 12, when a fellow Boy Scout shared pictures of Philmont with him. He has lived in New Mexico since 1987, exploring the state on foot, bike, skis, or with a fly rod in hand. After working as a carpenter, a naturalist, a geology instructor, and a junior high school science teacher, the guy's done it all, Craig took over primary care of his then infant daughter, and that's when he started his freelance writing career. His books include such notable titles as Fly Fishing Northern New Mexico, Los Alamos Trails, Quads, Shoeboxes, and Sunken Living Rooms, A History of Los Alamos Housing, and Via Grande, A History of the Baca Location No. 1. Craig currently serves as the Open Space and Trails Specialist for Los Alamos County, and he lives here with his wife June and children Jessica and Alex, who share his love of the outdoors. Craig?
What I wanted to start with was to let you know that the history of Fuller Lodge is going to be backwards tonight, because when you think about it, if the building was opened for use in 1929, and here we are in 2009, and the ranch school was here from when it was founded in about 1917 until 1942, the ranch school years and their use of this building, even though they put it together, it's the smallest portion of the history of Fuller Lodge. But we're going to concentrate on that tonight because I think that's the part that most folks don't have a good solid knowledge of. The story of how this talk and how the book of Logs and Stone came together is, I guess I was looking at the housing book and trying to find some photos of the lodge and the older buildings in town, and came across some historic photos of the actual construction of Fuller Lodge, and I found those absolutely fascinating. The details that you can see in those photos that you can see if you look really hard at this building one. And that's the advantage of doing the show inside Fuller Lodge, is that I'll be able to say, you see those columns right back there, the large ones? We're going to see those again, but there's not going to be a roof on the building. At least I hope we're going to see those again. So let's start with the part of the story that I want to. Well, I thought we had it there for a second. We're going to take a look at the very early portion of Fuller Lodge's history, and we're going to think about how this building got started and who really put it together. So I'm going to spoil a couple of the slides here so we can get underway. One of the things that everybody says is that John Galmeen designed this building. John Galmeen was an architect from Santa Fe. He had worked with Hazel Pond and put together houses for her. And when A.J. Connell, who was the director of the ranch school, was looking for someone to design his grand lodge, he turned to Meem for assistance. I was doing a little background into architecture here and found that I guess there's a Frank Lloyd Wright quote there that we might see that says, there's two parts to architecture. One of them is art and one of them is science. And my proposal tonight is that the science of the design of this building, the trusses that you see up there, the way the columns sit and hold the rafters up, the science was John Gall Meems doing, because he's the one who knew how to engineer a building. But the art of this building, the real soul of the building, was put together by A.J. Connell, who started out his working career as a wrangler and a scout leader and a forest ranger in the Pecos district with the Santa Fe National Forest. So did he have any ideas about architecture? Probably not. But still, he is the one who made this building what it is today, which is still, here we are 80 years later, inside the room that Connell designed for a large meeting of people who lived in Los Alamos. 80 years later, this building has got the same uses that it had when it was designed. So I think A.J. Connell had a certain skill that delivered this building to the community of Los Alamos, to his ranch school first, and then in between through the Manhattan Project and through the Atomic Energy Commission. So Connell's original thought for this building was his school's expanding, he needs to have more room. Most of the school facilities were run out of the big house, which is, well, was just over there, probably about where Energy Solutions sits today, just on the other side of the old Pueblo that sits over there. And the building wasn't quite enough for his operations anymore. So what he said was, well, I need a brand new building. Well, if you know anything about the history of the ranch school, Connell was always in financial trouble in the early years. So even though he wanted to put the building here, and he had a really good idea of how it was going to go together, he didn't have, well, number one, he didn't own the land. The title to the land that the school sat on was held by a Santa Fe bank. And the Santa Fe bank said, well, until you prove to us that you can actually pay us something for the mortgage that's due, we can't let you build anything on this property. So number one stumbling block was obtaining some kind of agreement with the bank to allow him to further construction on the ranch school grounds. Number two is he had to have the financial backing needed to put this building together. The final cost for Fuller Lodge in $1929 was about $33,000. So he had to put together a considerable sum of money in those days. And so what he did was what he had always done, turned to the students and their parents in particular and said, can you put up some money so that we can have enough money to put a new structure on the ranch school grounds? It kind of worked, but it still came up short. I'm not sure how much, but the final donation that put him over the top was from the Philo Fuller family. And of course, that will become an important part of the history of Los Alamos in the name of Fuller Lodge. I got the "it's coming" sign, so here we go. Mr. Fuller, the elder, was a lumberman from Michigan and apparently was a wealthy gentleman, had enough funds to send his son out west to the Los Alamos Ranch before it was a ranch school. Edward arrived in 1917 when it was just Ashley Pond and A.J. Connell trying to put together something here, but they kind of had a little dude operation at the same time. They took in guests, and Fuller was one of the first ones to come here. Fuller had polio. He couldn't get around very well on foot, but he was an excellent horseback rider, so he found that the lifestyle here on the Mesa was just perfect for his needs. He became a healthier man and really enjoyed what he was doing here so much that Connell hired him as his first staff member in about 1917. He wasn't a teacher. He was kind of like the supervisor of some of the younger boys. So he had a function on the school's grounds, and he also had the opportunity to do the things that he loved, which was riding horses in the Jemez Mountains. Fuller died in 1923, before Fuller Lodge became a reality. And with that and the friendship between Connell and Fuller and the financial backing of Edward's father, Philo, the dream became a reality. And to honor his friend, Connell, from the very start, before there was a building, said that this would be Edward P. Fuller Lodge, and that is how the building got its name. So in 1927, as Connell's trying to put together all of this financial stuff, he gets enough money and finally is ready to start talking to his architect, Meem. Their first meeting is in January 1927, and Connell had some very specific ideas of what he wanted. And if you look around you'll see most of what Connell's vision for this building was. A very large hall with an open feeling that would house 70 people. I think we got more than that in here tonight. The idea was that it would open to the east through great windows or doors, and it would face the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Well, we still face the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, we just can't see them anymore. So we're halfway there still. Connell also wanted to have other functions to the building, but they were of lesser importance than that one. And that was just other rooms to house staff, because at that time there was very limited operations on the grounds. And as the operations expanded, there was not enough room to house everybody. So putting all that together, they sat down, probably in the big house, and had their discussion about how the building would come together. The mystery is going to be those vertical logs. You got to turn around. Well, I guess you can see some on this side too. The vertical log structure of Fuller Lodge is mimicking that vertical log structure that the big house had. And you can't see the picture of the big house, but at some point we will. And the big house has the same outward appearance as the Fuller Lodge does. So Heather and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, and we weren't the first ones to try to solve this mystery, who was the architect for the big house? Because it's important, because the architect for the big house influenced the construction of Fuller Lodge. So there's several options on this. There's an architect, I think his name is Rupp. He is out of Santa Fe, and he designed buildings at the Sunmount Sanatorium, I believe, and they had sleeping porches just like the big house did. But if you think about why there were sleeping porches at the big house, it was because that's what Connell wanted. He wanted to have his boys sleeping essentially outside, but protected from the elements also. So I've kind of crossed him off of the list. Jesse Nussbaum designed parts of the Palace of the Governors in Santa Fe, so he kind of had some architectural experience, even though he was more of an archaeologist in that time. So it could have been him, but there seems to be no relationship between him and anybody here at the ranch school, so we have to cross him off the list. There are several other people who are possible, and if you read John Worth and Linda Aldrich's book, they have some suggestions also. But there's a quote from Meem, and if I can remember most of it, I can remember the essential part, and that is, Fuller Lodge will be a combination of the Spanish architecture, which is familiar with those who live in Santa Fe, and this type of mountain house that Mr. Connell has devised for his school. So if you think about what the type of mountain house means, well, maybe it just means vertical logs. So maybe it was Connell, or at least Connell's idea, to put those vertical logs in the big house, and thus his design follows through into Fuller Lodge. If you look at it, I was hoping to show you this picture of the inside of the big house, but if you see it, this is what essentially you're going to see. The photo looks an awful lot like the anteroom here in Fuller Lodge. And this building across the way, even the interior was designed very similar to the interior of this building here. So if those are indeed Connell's ideas, vertical logs, an anteroom with stone fireplace made out of natural materials, the fireplaces in the big house are made out of the same bandolier tuff that the fireplaces here in Fuller Lodge are. If Connell didn't design all that stuff himself, then he certainly had a huge influence on how it all got put together. So I think the art of the design of Fuller Lodge, all that lies with A.J. Connell, a Boy Scout leader, a director of a ranch school, and not an architect. When it came time to put the building together. It was Meem's job to go hire a contractor. So he went up to Colorado to the Conejos Ranch, which I meant to take a look and see if it was still up there somewhere. If anybody ever runs across the Conejos Ranch, there's a vertical log structure up there, or a horizontal log structure up there that was built by the same contractor, George Tietz, who put together Fuller Lodge. The connection was made. I guess Meem went up there to take a look at the work that he had done up in Colorado, liked what he saw, so hired him on the spot, brought him down here, and started to do the work here at Fuller. I jumped ahead a little bit, that's why I like an outline in my presentation. So let's go back 1 year to 1927, because Fuller Lodge takes a whole year to put together, not the construction part. The construction probably started almost exactly 81 years ago today. Sometime in early May, they actually started putting the building together. But assembling the materials took almost a full year for Meem and his staff and for Connell to come together with all the stuff that they needed for assembling the logs. There's a famous number that I've used in so many publications. 771 logs go into the structure of Fuller Lodge, and that doesn't include aspens. So, does that number seem high to you? It did to me. So I went and I took a picture of the portico standing in this corner over here, and I counted the logs that I could see. And I could see 128 logs just in that front section of Fuller. So I think 771 is probably a really accurate number. 771 logs, and those are the ponderosa pines, and oh, it still works, cool. That ranges from the really big ones like this, the columns that come up from the floor. One of the construction photos is without that wall in it. It's taken from the outside. And what you see is 3 rows of huge ponderosa pine logs. And it's these that are holding up the roof of the dining area here and also the roof on the portico. So those are the largest ones. I tried really hard last week to look at those long rafters in the ceiling, the ones that run all the way from this end all the way over. I took a guess, they're about 60 feet long. The plans call for a series of logs that were 78 feet long. That has to be those up there, but it seems like there's seams in those, so I'm not exactly sure that that's where the longest logs were used in the building. But this is what you can do when you have Fuller Lodge all to yourself sometime, and just come in and start looking around and noticing little things that went to put the building together. 771 ponderosa pine logs. How about these babies here? What are these things? Anybody know what these are?
Aspens.
Okay, those are the aspens. How many aspens did it take to put the building together? It was only 262, and it probably wasn't as hard to cut those as it was to cut the large ponderosa logs. So the story here is that in the spring of 1927, Connell and a Forest Service employee and Meem head out into the Jemez to select their 771 logs. And they start doing the standard thing. I get to do this now too. Mark a tree and something either good or bad is going to happen to it. In this case, those logs are going to be the ones that came down here. They selected their logs mostly from just that meadow area that we now call the western area and the fringe of the forest around it. So most of the materials for the log portion of Fuller Lodge came from probably within a mile of where we are, which is a pretty good way of developing a building where you're going to say, this is an experiment in the use of native materials. Native materials doesn't necessarily mean a mile away, but that's the case here in Fuller Lodge. The aspens probably came from a little higher up, but easy to bring those down the Camazon Trail, just as a speculation. How about the fireplace? I can't quite get over there. The tufts from the fireplace had to come locally. That's Bandelier Tuff. You know where it is. It's all the orange cliffs on the way up to town. It's everywhere. Where was the quarry for those particular stones? Well, I don't have the answer, but if it were me building this structure, I'd want to have those stones as close to where I am as possible. So where am I going to go? Right, you go that way, you don't really hit anything. But if you go this way, north towards the edge of Pueblo Canyon, there's a shelf made entirely of bandolier tuff, and it's got some intriguing holes in it that kind of look like a quarry. Can't guarantee it, but that would be my guess of where those stones came from for the fireplace. So in assembling the materials for the lodge, it takes 3 guys time to go up into the mountains to select the logs. One thing that Connell did afterwards is he went and erased some of the blazes that had been placed on the trees and marked some other trees. I should admit this, but when the Forest Service was thinning behind my house, I did the same thing. What you do is, wait a minute, those are my trees. And I love those trees exactly where they are, so I don't want them to go away. That's what Connell did too. Some of the trees that they selected was too close. He said that they added to the character of the building and then the ground, so they weren't going to change that. So he selected some other logs, and Bill Armstrong knows exactly what I did behind my house, so I assumed that the forester knew exactly what Connell did in his house. Good evening, everyone. I'm Craig Martin. I'm here to do a slideshow on history of Fuller Lodge. All right, let's catch up where we were. We'll skip the early stuff here because you know all about the history of the ranch school and how it was purchased in 1915 by that man there, Ashley Pond. There's A.J. A.J. Connell, the artist behind Fuller Lodge, and his dog. And then here's my great quote, form and function should be one. They shouldn't be separate when you do a building. And not knowing much about architecture, that one struck me as exactly what went on in this building here. The structure that continues to function as it was designed for 80 years is probably built right. That's my spin on Frank Lloyd Wright. The big house is a spitting image of Fuller Lodge, kind of. Yeah, even the windows have the same appearance. The portico out there. Everything about that building built, 10 years before Fuller Lodge says Fuller Lodge. So this is why the architect of that building is a little important here. So like we discussed, as Connell's school expands, this is what he needs, and this is why he designed this Fuller the way he does. He needs a large facility for dining and for other special events, but because he lacks the funds and the deed is held by the Santa Fe Bank, he can't put it all together right away. Once all those restrictions are lifted and he gets the money, then he can start construction. The parents finance most of it, but let's take a look at Edward Fuller now so we can see what Ed looked like. Ed always strikes me as kind of a guy that I would like, just a friendly, personable kind of character. Always has a smile on his face in every picture that you see. Is his dog in that picture? That's the only picture without his dog, but I guess his horse is just as good. So he comes as a guest to this location in 1917, stays to become the first staff member, supervises the young students. And then here's one that I came across in Linda and John's book, because he was the school's first photographer. I've never seen an Edward Fuller picture, but maybe there's some up in the archives that I haven't had a chance to look at. But just knowing that he knew how to take pictures in 1919 is good stuff. So Connell's vision, 2-story front building. Oh yeah, he wanted it 2 stories. At least the dining area, he wanted 2 stories. It has to blend with the landscape. There's the kind of thing that I put in the outline so I remember to say. So blend it with the landscape. Did he succeed in that one? I think so. Nice dining hall for all this, and then his little auxiliary rooms would be an infirmary upstairs, a smoking room for the boys. And when I said that on the radio this morning, he said they were smoking hams. No. It's the old days. They were smoking pipes and cigars and cigarettes, whatever. So the architect is provided by the wife of the founder of the school. This is Hazel Pond, who was Ashley Pond's spouse. She had discovered Meme, who was a relatively new architect at the time, in 1925, and had Meme design a house for her. And apparently he did several more in the course of her life. This is Mr. Meme himself. I don't think I've ever seen another picture of him. This is the only one I've ever seen. He's born in Brazil, missionary parents in 1894. And his connection to Santa Fe starts as he's recovering from tuberculosis at the Sunmont Sanatorium. And one of the doctors says, "You have an engineering background. You should study Southwestern architecture and see if you can find the common elements that make Southwestern architecture." So Meme did that. And, well, in Santa Fe, you'll see plenty of examples of his work that are more like his style than Fuller Lodge is. So Meme's not working alone. He enters a partnership with Cassius McCormick in 1924. They start their business and have enough reputation by the time that Connell wants to put this building together that they're hired right off with Hazel Pond's recommendation. So the first meeting is in May of 1926. That's going to be a full 3 years before the building actually gets used. And then here's the quote here. "The exterior of the building should be a combination of Spanish architecture with the present mountain-type house developed by Mr. Connell, where the upright line is the main feature." Again, I don't know much about architecture, but I don't see much Spanish architecture influence here, with one possible exception. And that is, if you go up in some of the mountain villages northeast of here, you'll see some smaller structures with vertical logs. And it's called Jacal, Jackal, architecture. And it's just a small hut or maybe a cabin with the logs, not like the traditional Eastern horizontal logs, but with the vertical logs. And the reason is, it's a whole lot easier to stand a log up than it is to lift the last couple of logs onto the top of the wall. So a simple construction technique is why those buildings are here in northern New Mexico. Connell spent a lot of time in the Pecos Mountains, and I suspect that he saw a lot of Jacal architecture in the small villages up there, and that was the influence for at least thinking about a larger scale structure that has the same vertical line as its dominant. I'm much better when I have the pictures, aren't I? Whew. Okay, all right, here we go. The mystery of the architect. We've seen this. Here's the guy, Rapp designed Sunmount. Oh, I forgot Alan Pond, who's actually his cousin, who was an architect in Detroit, and he was a big supporter of the school. So he's probably the most likely candidate, other than Connell, in my mind, for putting this together. The Templetons were suggested. They're friends of the Ponds and had some dabbling in architecture, but didn't have any real experience. So I'm left with Connell himself as the main artistic designer of the big house and thus Fuller Lodge. So here's another view of the big house, and this one even more striking in the similarities between Fuller and the big house. And then the inside shot for you is this one here. When I first saw the photo, of course, I just thought it was this room back here. But no, it's actually inside the big house. And the stairway is different, and the fireplace is put together differently. So it's different building, but exactly the same styles that we have here. The original plans for Fuller Lodge are dated in 1927, 2 years before it would be completed. And then there were a couple of revisions as time went on. Connell was a very picky gentleman and always had suggestions to make to the engineer. But I think that's fair. Here's one of the original blueprints for Fuller Lodge, and show you some of the features that you can see in here. This is the smoking room as opposed to the dining room. We're sitting in the dining room, so the smoking room tonight is the ice cream room, right? It's the Curtis room. The boys, with permission from their parents, were allowed to smoke in there, but that was the only place on the school grounds they were allowed to indulge. So that was, a room for that. It was also a room for the hunting club and the fishing club and several of the smaller organizations. They would meet in there. I've never been in the basement here, although Wayne Colrust, who's a colleague at the county, has often said, "Come on, I want to take you down there. I'm just a little I don't know what to expect down there, but someday we'll get down there. Underneath the dining area here, you can jump up and down all you want. You're not going to crash the floor in because it's sitting right onto the foundation there. And then the portal is just the way it is today. So here's our 771 log number. Okay, I'll ask again. How many aspens did it take to build Fuller Lodge? 262. Oh, there it is. Okay, very good. You guys are good. All right. And then in that picture, I counted 128 logs. So I think it's a good, accurate picture. This is what the grounds to the west looked like about the time they selected the logs for the building. So it was a pretty thickly wooded area, and certainly a good source of ponderosa pine logs from there up into the foothills. Okay, we're almost caught up to where we were. And then here's that edge of Pueblo Canyon where there's the same kind of boulder and there's some strange cracks and there's all kinds of weird things over there. It certainly is a likely spot for a stone quarry for the fireplaces for this building. Mr. George, I assume is this guy here because he's the only one that kind of has a dress shirt on, and all his workers. George supervised what was even then known as the Edward Fuller Lodge as it's being constructed. George is the contractor. And the only thing I can't figure out is this guy is holding something really strange. So if somebody knows old construction techniques, come and see me sometime. We'll look at that picture in a little less grainy version, and we'll try to figure out what he's got. It's kind of a strange saw-looking thing that looks like it may have been a tool used to assemble the lodge. If you got all those logs to take care of, you got to have a way to cut them. And the way they did it was they set up a tractor as part of their sawmill. And I'm not much of an engineer, so I don't know exactly how that worked. But I'll show you a better picture on the next one. But here's the lodge as it's going up, and then that's probably Spruce Cottage, or maybe it's the big house. But you're looking kind of to the east in that shot. And then the same sawmill situation, now looking back towards the, kind of towards Ashley Pond. I would guess that Ashley Pond is over here. Things to notice in this photo is here's the belt that drives the sawmill from the tractor, which is, there wasn't much up here at that point, so that's the only way you get stuff done. And then I like the construction camp made up of the tents in the background. So the construction crew actually lived on the grounds for the summer, and I assume that they bailed out as the snows arrived in November to warmer spots, but they lived here during the construction process. And you can see there's both boards being cut here. Here's the big saw blade, and then the logs. Those logs there, certainly big enough to be parts of the columns, although they're not long enough there. As the building gets assembled, it's kind of an interesting view here. Here's the columns that are probably the columns on the portico on the other side of the porch. These columns here against the east wall. And then I think you're seeing those columns there also. And that's these three large columns. So this wall that you see, as I'm guessing, is this inside wall here. So a lot of log work to be done. The combination of tools that they use is kind of interesting. It sure looks like a power saw to me, but I suspect that they ran it maybe with compressed air back in those days. But this, what is this? Anybody recognize that? The rafter, okay. Look at the angle that he's cutting that rafter on. It's exactly the angle of the joints that I thought that I saw over top of some of the false trusses up here. So he's probably cutting one of the rafters for the roof here. Very nice. It wasn't all power tools. If you look at some of the work on my architecture is not very good. Those things that hold, or at the top of the columns that hold the trusses up, they may be like corbels, right? Okay, all right. Look closely at those, you can see the adze marks how they were shaped. And I really do recommend that sometime you walk around here and take a look at some of the finer details like this that put the lodge together. Very interesting aspects. Another shot here, this is probably here's the fireplace over here, and then looks like the kitchen going up over there. The stone kitchen was smaller at first and it was in the back. Wheelbarrow being hauled up by a pulley. So I assume that was for the stonework going on over here in the chimney. So it's probably for the mortar to hold the stoneworks together. Thinking about the size of the scaffold it needed to build that chimney, it was a pretty good size. Most of the other aspects of the structure are assembled at this point. And let's go back. Okay. So, did anybody listen to the radio this morning when I was on? I always joke with David. Oh, okay. One person. I always joke with David, I'm never nervous when I'm on the radio because there's only 4 people listening. But I said, no matter what, you can't spoil this, okay? What is the roof of Fuller Lodge today? What is the material on the top? Shingles. What kind of shingles? Yeah, kind of that cedar shake stuff, okay? Is that the way it started? Is that the original roof material? Anybody want to take a guess what the original roof material was? Sorry. Shake cedar? No, not this time, okay. Bark? No, it would seem logical since everything else is that way, right? Okay, all right. I heard a rumor probably from Bart Ollinger who said, no, it was asbestos shingles. And I went, no way, okay? Where's the next one? Where is it? Oh, sorry, I'm going backwards. I'm good at this. It says J&M asbestos shingles, okay? Those are real funny S's, and I think that's why I didn't notice that until I gave it a really detailed look last week. But if you take a look at the photos, you can see the asphalt, the asbestos shingles style there. Okay, I'm going to stop using that. But in here, even better, okay? And then on the roof of this. So that was the original roof material. And hey, I wouldn't mind if we went back to that one sometime because those cedar things make me nervous, especially about 9 years ago. So one of the things that was done a couple years ago is Doug Reed, who is a log structure specialist, came back, and I got a chance to talk to them on many occasions while they were redoing the exterior of the building. And he said, well, I'm going to put what I think is the original chinking color in this little alcove over here where nobody can see it. And I said, why? He says, because I think it's weird, but I think that's right. So that pinkish, purplish color is what Doug dug out when he was looking at what the original chinking was. And that's why we got that out there today. You know, I'm used to it now, but it was kind of startling at first to see that. But the chinking was an important part of this, and I'm sure that Meme, in this case, took a great deal of pride in putting together the exact color that he thought would benefit the rest of the structure and the logs. Some of the details that Meme was really careful about was the design of the bell tower, and I still haven't got up to take a picture of the bell. Someday I'll do that. But even the lights out there in the portico were designed by Meme using the existing ranch school logos and things. By January 1929, the building was ready to go, and it functioned as part of the school for the ensuing 13 years. Yeah, it used to snow here, didn't it? As form meets function, we look at the way Connell put this building together to meet his rigid guidelines for how he wanted the boys to behave. So the anteroom over here is part of that design. His idea was the boys would assemble as somebody rang the bell, which is this rope that comes down here. When dinner was just about ready, the bell would ring. They would come from the spruce cottage in the big house, and they would enter the doors back here into the anteroom, and they would sit there, we assume quietly. These are very well behaved compared to some of the Boy Scouts I saw the other day. So they're doing really well. But it kept them out of the main dining area until everything was ready. And when everything was ready, those doors that are kind of hidden, they're the sliders, would open up, and then the boys would file in. They would sit in tables of, I guess, 8, and there would always be a master at the table, one of the teachers. And the master's job was to make sure that the conversation stayed at a high level, which is hard with Boy Scouts. And they were very structured, but the building was designed with that structure in mind. So Connell knew exactly what he wanted, not just because he wanted it to look a certain way, he wanted it to function a certain way. The large portico became the place for graduation ceremonies after Graduation Canyon. It was pretty far away from the school. It was probably difficult for a lot of folks to get to, so having those ceremonies right here at the school was a good idea. And it was well designed for those open types of ceremonies. The band would play in this room. It would be a place for concerts. Nice to see that there were saxophones back then, and people who doubled on saxophone and clarinet. Boy after my own heart there. Dances. This looks like a Valentine's dance because there's hearts on the wall. Probably girls up from the Broadmoor School in Santa Fe to provide, I guess, couldn't say dates, but partners for the kids. I don't know if this is a student band or not, but they're still performing and dancing. On the second floor, I'm not sure many folks have been up to the third floor. This is part of the third floor, and this was Connell's original room for the summertime. We're a little warm in here tonight. On the third floor, if we were up there right now, we'd probably think it was way too warm. So Connell lived here in the winter, and whenever it didn't get too warm, and moved out for the hotter months. His room was right there underneath the roof. It's a kind of an odd-shaped ceiling in the room, but very intricately designed. Just a very lovely way of doing it. Kept with the wood theme in his room, and this room functioned as part of the archives when I first arrived in town. It's probably a storage area now. The infirmary was this is the guest room that was this room up in here, just right behind us. Before the guest cottage got fully functioning, the parents of some of the students would come and visit and stay in this room up here. So we had the infirmary here. We had some quarters for some of the teachers. Other teachers, the married ones, lived in cabins down the way, but single teachers and sometimes married ones too when there was this crunch for space. The Curtis room functioned as a meeting place just as it does today. So for the entire school's 12 or 13 years here, the school functions the way that Connell wants it to, and this building becomes the centerpiece of his facility. And when these two gentlemen arrive in 1942, part of the attraction is this building itself. Fuller Lodge was certainly a part of the initial attraction of Oppenheimer to this place to establish Project Y. And the reason is it was a large enough facility. How many large facilities in small towns were there in northern New Mexico at the time? Santa Fe would have some larger buildings, but it was way too big for the project that was supposed to be secret and way too populated. So this was probably a major force in making Oppenheimer and Groves select this place for their secret project. During the Manhattan Project, this was the first place where people would come and stay when there wasn't anything else that was constructed around. They would also stay in the big house, and it continued to function as a place for new arrivals as time went on. Nice thing about the Manhattan Project is there were few modifications during the Manhattan Project time to the building. So it just stayed the same as it was during the Ranch School days, and it had the same functions. The only thing that I could think of was they added the T8 or the T31, which is just outside that door there. So the scene should look familiar here as we go through the Manhattan Project. It looks exactly like, well, there's maybe not 8 at a table, but sometimes there would be. A dining facility, a dance hall, place for plays and concerts. And some of the things that would go on during the Manhattan Project is the manager of the hotel here said that once he saw 6 Nobel laureates sitting around a single table inside this room, having some discussion and probably eating a little bit too. Musicians, I'm thinking of Edward Teller, or Ernest Titterton lived in, I think he lived in a guest house right next door. He would sneak over here at night and play the grand piano, and if it was Teller, you'd hear classical music, and if it was Titterton, you'd hear jazz, even though he was an English, a refined Englishman, but that was his favorite type of music. And Otto Frisch has a quote in his biography about sitting in this room in the morning and having come from England as part of the British mission to be a part of the Manhattan Project. The sunlight streaming through those windows there every morning struck him as the best part of living in Los Alamos. Because, well, you can just picture what that's like here. The sun every morning comes right through those windows, rising over the mountains, and that's got to be a special treat for someone from dark and gray country. The AEC will modify the building, and you know, I'm over it now, I guess. I've kind of become accustomed to those outside, the wings. This is what's underneath the wings, the stonework in the wings. It's just a standard brick thing. The design for the wings and the hotel expansion on both sides of the main MEAM building here was by Mr. Kruger, an architect from Santa Fe, who designed almost everything in Los Alamos in the Atomic Energy Commission's first years here. This modification, and here it is going together, the north wing, which would be that one over there, has got a couple of rooms upstairs. It's got a barber shop, and then what is now the facility office was the hotel manager's office. And where the guitar sits is the lobby window. We'll see that in a minute. The south wing, which is this one down here, has additional rooms, and you know, if you're really obsessed with this kind of thing, like I get sometimes, you can go through and look at what's there now and try to say, okay, here's what one of those rooms looked like. This is the entryway into a room that was in the Nam-Bay room now. And there's a bathroom here, and then a closet, and then you can just imagine this little skinny passage into this little tiny room in the back there. But you can kind of piece together the floor plan just by looking at the arrangement of the rooms today. The west wing, which is where the kitchen is, was expanded too. The kitchen was made larger, and there was a cook storage or cook's quarters added. And you know, I never realized what that little room behind the green room was before I started thinking about it. That was the cook's quarters, and if you wander back in that way today, you can still see that that's the way it would be. And there's a shot of the way it looks now. It looks like period furniture. On the second floor, this is my favorite thing, on the west wing, they put 6 rooms. The average size was 10 by 12. That's where the archives is today. It's still crowded up there, but it probably was even more crowded back then if you were trying to stay. What the AEC did, okay, I'm over the wings, but this is the biggest thing that I always complain about, is they put the lodge sign up. And so if you ask most folks, okay, I'll meet you at the front of Fuller Lodge. Where are they going to meet you? Where the parking lot is, right? That's the front. Well, no, that's the front. You know, the front of Fuller Lodge is where the front patio is. But because of this sign here and this being the main entrance for so many years during the Atomic Energy Commission's time, the building kind of got flipped around. So, you know, if you want to really get me someday, say, yeah, I'll meet you at the front of Fuller Lodge, you know, right where the cars are parked. That will certainly get me. Some of the differences between AEC and Jean Gaume MEAM architecture, okay? MEAM design lantern. AEC lantern. They had the right spirit, I will admit that, but it's not quite the same. And I'm just assuming that's from that time frame, but it sure has the same similar kind of work. It looked like they were kind of trying to mimic what Meme had done. 2 fireplace chimneys. Here's the AEC one. Here's the fireplace, the top of this chimney here. Smooth rock work for the AEC. Somehow I like the rougher stone, the more native natural stone look more than the smooth stuff. The lodge is operated as a hotel and a restaurant, but the cocktail lounge always got me because I wasn't quite sure about that one. Okay, so you come into the lobby. Here's the lobby window. That's where the guitar sits today. This is the office area. That's the main entrance, the front entrance, according to the AEC. Okay. Here's the cocktail lounge. Well, they cut this hole in through here. That used to be a window back in there. Okay, cocktail lounge. I'm staring at this with Doug Reed, and he's saying, "What's going on here? There used to be a door here." And then somebody, and I forget who, said, "Oh, that was the way to get into the bar." So the Curtis Room was the cocktail lounge, and the bar that used to be in there may still be in town, not too far from here, and I haven't investigated that yet, so Jim, we're going to do that someday. This here, it was the way in. It's kind of a little mysterious way around the corner, but that was apparently the way into the cocktail lounge. So think about that next time you're in the Curtis Room. We're going to wrap up here with just kind of a quick look at the way things went from there. The Big House is another great mystery that Heather and I came upon when we were trying to put this book together, because the demise of the Big House went totally unrecorded as far as we can tell. We went through newspapers in Santa Fe. We went through all the stuff that came out of Los Alamos at the time. We could find construction of the post office, which this is. But shortly thereafter, to make way for the shopping center, the Big House was torn down with nary a cry from anyone. It probably wasn't in the best condition. It probably was a fire hazard, but this building got saved and that one didn't. When 1966 came around and the AEC wanted to transfer ownership of this building to somebody else, they didn't really care who, and started looking at the county, some forward-thinking citizens put together the Save the Lodge Committee and made sure that this building didn't suffer the same fate as the Big House did. And I certainly appreciate that. Read the plaque sometime that this is the museum, Fuller Lodge, and the Indian ruins are given to Los Alamos County as a recreational historic area that has been acquired from the United States of America for use by the public. And that was a good move on the part of the AEC at that point. I appreciate their forethought there. So what's the building get used for today? I just wandered by while I was kind of doing my little study, and sure enough, there was Louise Mendius singing down this end of the hall. So at noontime, it's still concert hall. It's still a place where dances happen. It's still a place where the community gathers to create new memories of things that we all love and enjoy. The one thing that's hard, though, is it's an important building, but it's a difficult building to maintain. And my employer, the county, and I don't always agree, but I think they're doing some pretty good work here in terms of what they're looking at to the continuing restoration of Fuller Lodge. This was the work that Doug Reed did back probably 8 to 10 years ago, restoring the exterior of the structure. It was a pretty hefty price tag. I don't remember what it was, but it was a substantial amount of money for the county to invest. And then more recently, all the windows and doors in this part of the building have been replaced. And I like what they did. I like the style. It mimics what was here before. So the county has a huge responsibility here, and I think so far they're doing good by their responsibility. The community center. Well, okay. Other uses here are, we know that there's all these things that go on in this building. The archives are here, the arts center. We still have concerts and dances. I don't know if we do proms here anymore. I think it was at the gym this time around. Classes and lectures, that's a lot of things that I've been here for. We still have weddings here. But here's my challenge to everybody. Everybody here has a personal memory of Fuller Lodge, something that happened to them in their life that was startling or surprising or important. So I'm going to tell you my story, and then when you go home tonight, I want you to come up with your own and send it to me in an email or something. It'll be fun. May 7th, 2000, my daughter Jessica is about 12, 13 years old. She comes into this building to play a piano recital with her fellow students and plays on the grand piano. I'm a music lover. I was just thrilled, it was the first of my kids to make beautiful music, And to have it in this building, I remember sitting here and just looking and drinking in the atmosphere and the history, and that my daughter was now a part of that, and I smelled smoke. And I went, oh, that fire. Maybe it's a little more serious than I thought. And when we exited the building, what we saw was that blow-up that happened on May 7th of 2000, and Serra Grande jumped over the ridge behind Water Canyon. So the mixed emotion for me is seeing that piano there and remembering how thrilled I was that my daughter was part of this building, and also suddenly realizing that I think we were in big trouble. So go home and think about your personal memory of Fuller Lodge, and if you get a chance to share it with me someday, I'd love to hear the stories. So Meme and Connell, I think, did a great job putting this building together. We're talking about the footings of the buildings and how these logs get held up. This part of the building is on solid ground. I'm not sure, there's probably a thin layer of concrete, maybe 6 inches of concrete underneath it, but this is not excavated, and there's not a basement under this part of the building. The basement is over that way. So that's part of it.
What holds the logs together at the bottom?
What holds the logs together at the bottom? That's probably a good question that I probably can't answer. One thing you should know is not all the logs are what they seem. 3 over from the column here. Sorry, the screen's blocking it. Do this sometime when nobody's around. There's hollow logs here. Some of them were cut in half, hollowed out, and then the piping was stuck into those. So you got to come along the wall and knock, and you can actually hear which ones are that way. But I really don't know how they're held together. Question in the back.
Craig, about the big house, part of the problem with the big house is it didn't have a good foundation. And that was one of the points when this was built, to make sure it did have. Because that big house, I'll tell you honestly, you got scared when you're on some of the stairs when there were crowds in there. And a number of people were very worried about it at the time. So I'm sure when they went to build this, they were not going to make the mistake of the big house.
Okay, everybody here, Jay's answered that the big house didn't have the same kind of foundation that this building had, so it was very rickety. And that's before my time here, so that's great information. Thanks, Jay.
You know who some of the leaders were of the Save the Lodge effort?
Help me out here, Eddie. Don Keir. Now, we're talking in 1966. I don't think Don was here in 66. Oh, okay. Anybody else remember? I mean, I know I've read the names and I've read a history, but I didn't review that before I came tonight. Probably Byers. Remember anybody, Chuck or Chick? No? Okay. The Historical Society has a little pamphlet that's available, at the library or upstairs, and it's got a little bit of a history of that. So that would be your source for that. Nancy?
When was the elevator put in?
The elevator. I would guess the elevator was put in during the first Atomic Energy Commission remodel.
No,
No?
it was put in when Marjorie Bell Chambers was heading up the Restoration Committee, and that was After 1973.
Okay, so after 73. So it had to be some kind of requirement at that point in time for a restoration project, so, okay, that does, okay. Chick?
You didn't cover the wonderful event when Harold stole the rugs.
Well, yeah, there's a reason why I didn't. The rugs here are not the original tapestries that adorned the main dining room here. Those disappeared mysteriously in 1966, so that date should, associate with some other event that would make you say that maybe they went to the south. Okay, and I don't know where they are, and that's just a rumor. Oh, they're in the study center. Okay.
Library is the lab.
Okay. Okay. So. Okay. Okay, so it was after that one. Okay.
Early 70s.
Okay. All right.
The ugly lantern isn't, you can't blame ABC.
Oh, okay.
That was late 70s, early 80s.
Okay. Cool. Okay.
I think the county.
Oh, it made such a great story, though.
It's a great story.
All right. So, as always, I learn as much as I present when I do one of these things. Ken.
What holds the roof truss to the vertical column?
The roof truss to the vertical column, there's some kind of weird joint in there. It's one of those woodworking joints. It had a name, it's not a dovetail, but it's
Not a nail.
not nails. There were bolts holding things down below, but not up above.
All right. Where was Connell's room?
Connell's room, and originally was
On the second floor or third?
third floor. As I recall, I've been up to the third floor in a long time, but I think that doorway there is the stairs up to the third floor. And
When I
then,
came on an interview here in spring of '47, I was put up there, and I was amazed at the amenities they had there. Refrigerator had drinks in it.
so it wasn't as bad as I always imagined up on the third floor.
I think it was made for probably Fermi or somebody.
So it probably was a special room for somebody up there on the third floor, so it had refrigerators and all kinds of other amenities up there to make you forget about how hot it was in the summer. Any other questions? I know we've all been here a long time tonight, so we'll wrap it up. Thanks again, everybody. Appreciate it. Oh, you got